How many of you would love to multiply your launch-based business? How many of you are writing or consider writing a book? Okay. How many of you would like to use a book to multiply your business? Yes. Okay, awesome. How many of you hate books, hate businesses, you came here for the food? Okay. Thanks for your honesty. My name is Sebastian Knight, and I'm the founder of the Free Entrepreneur Movement. And today, I'd like to share with you what I call PLC 0. How to multiply your launch-based business by writing a freaking good book. How many of you are up for that? Awesome. But first, I need to start by telling you about something that happened 2 years ago. In October 2017, I am locked in a soundproof room in a bad neighborhood of Dallas, Texas. And there's a loaded Smith & Wesson 9mm handgun pointed at my chest. The young woman holding the gun is a young Israeli woman trained by the IDF, Israeli Defense Force. And I know that there's a good chance I'm not getting out of it. Today I'd like to tell you how that story started, how it ended, and how it relates to something I did that was even more difficult than that situation over the last 2 years, which was writing a book. You see, I set out at the end of 2017 to write a book called Profession Entrepreneur Libre. So the working English title would be Own Your Freedom. And let me share you just a few numbers so you can understand what this project entailed. The first one, this is the cover, the first one was I set out to write a 65,000 word book. So in terms of Craig's conception of books, that's like 11 books in just one. But I ended up with a 121,000 monster of a novel instead. So that was quite an adventure. I had 1,256 people from my community apply to be ambassadors for the book. So I involved the actual people I wanted to read the book into helping me write it, edit it, and promote it. Here's what it looks like. Over the course of writing the book, I did 10 drafts. And all of these drafts I uploaded to Google Documents in a shared document where people could edit or comment in line inside of the text and say, well, I don't like this metaphor. Could you delete this paragraph? Please explain this better. Why the hell are you writing books, Sebastian? Stuff like that. So I had my ambassadors comment, and in total I received close to 6,000 inline comments and suggestions over the course of doing these 10 drafts of the manuscript. And the good news is, since you can't read French, most of you, you don't know how much tough love I got in some of those comments. Close to 2,500 of those comments made it into the final manuscript. So my book is 2,500 times better thanks to involving the actual community of the people that needed to read it. I lost 16 pounds during the process, and here's how that goes. So my schedule was wake up, run or bike for an hour, so I lived in Nice on the Promenade des Anglais, jump in the sea for a quick dip, whip up my bulletproof coffee, sit on my computer, and write until I'm empty. And then have a late lunch and spend the rest of the day with my wife and my daughter. So now I'm in great shape thanks to the book, which is completely different from all of my favorite previous books where I had to lose the weight of the book afterwards. But I was never a good runner. So this is a lady that she was probably 50 or 65, and she passes me by like a rocket as I'm running. So this is like 2 seconds after she passed me by. So I'm like really slow. And on her back, on her t-shirt, it says, "Don't be discouraged." I took that to heart. Here's what my biggest challenge was as I was going through this process. Initially, I set out to write a bestseller, but then I realized, so this was my 7th book, and I've had best-selling books, but I realized this time I wanted to write a classic, and there's a difference. A bestseller is a book that you have to keep lifting to keep it selling. A classic is a book that sells itself through the people that have read it and communicate it to other people. So I wanted to write the book for French entrepreneurs on how to get a business started. There's an inherent challenge in this. Here it is. After reading Perennial Seller, awesome book, Hitmakers, awesome book, and taking the courses from Bill O'Hanlon and Michael Hyatt on writing a book proposal, I wrote my book proposal, and I realized during one of the exercises I had a mismatch. My avatar is one of those French-speaking entrepreneurs that wants to change their life, and there's more than a third of the population who says, "I want to start a business." But every year, how many of them actually do it? Well, in my country, that's 1 person in 20 in that group that says, "I definitely want to start a business." When we did a study with the Free Entrepreneur Movement of 201 people that said they wanted to start a business but never did it, we found out that one of the big reasons is they know that they don't know how to do it, but they really don't want to read about how to do it. How many of you can guess that this is a struggle? Okay. So now I'm writing a business book for people that do not read business books. So I went on a quest to find a genre that my book would fit in, because if it was just going to be a how-to business books, like there are many of them, in the French language, most of them fit into either the how to do a business plan and be a big Excel spreadsheet maniac, nobody reads those, or inspirational books like the biography of Steve Jobs, which most of my audience could not relate to and was not practical enough. So I had to find a way to write a book where people would get hooked at the beginning and read through to the end before they realize that I've magically transformed them and given them the keys to success. That was a big challenge. So I took a few classes. You'll have the slides, so you'll have the list. I took a ton of classes on writing not non-fiction books, but rather novels, movies, TV series, any kind of content where when people get started, they keep binge watching. I wanted my people to binge read the book. And then I started reading about it. First book I read was Blair Snyder's Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you will ever need. Blake Snyder, sorry. The subtitle is a little bit ironic because the next book I read was Blake Snyder's Save the Cat Strikes Back. More trouble for screenwriters to get into and out of. And then the next one was Blake Snyder's Save the Cat's blogs, more information and inspiration for writers. And Jessica Brody's Save the Cat writes a novel, the last book on novel writing you'll ever need. I kept reading, read a few other books in the last year about writing, the process of writing novels and all of that. This is my own star ranking, by the way, so If someone's getting 0 stars, it's a personal thing I had against them after wasting so much time on their books. But through the quest, I started to get it, but I didn't really get it until I read a book that was not a how-to book, but a fiction book. It was a Peter Hamilton book called The Reality Dysfunction, and he's a sci-fi writer. And his books are fairly thick, usually part of a series of 2 or 3 novels, sometimes more. They have epic scale, huge stakes, a huge cast of characters, where each character has their own arc over the course of the novel. So they cross paths, but it's not one of the typical novels where you follow just one person. Rather, you have a cast of characters where at least one of them you resonate with, and they go through their own ordeals until the end of the story. And that's when I realized most non-fiction books are structured like this, a series of colored blocks. Chapter 1 teaches you how to blah, 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 and maybe there's a little case study there about John Smith who did blah, 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 and his life was transformed. Awesome! Chapter 2 teaches how to do X, which is totally different from blah, 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 and sometimes even contradictory with blah, blah, blah. But whatever, maybe there's another case study of a different person that did the opposite of what John did, but it still worked for them. So awesome! And because of this disconnect, it's really easy to put a business book down. How many of you have books that you've started and never finished? How many of you might have more books that you've started and never finished than books that you've read in one? Yeah. So I realized I did not want to do this. What I wanted to do is to create my own genre, one where I would teach people with stories, but have the stories be intertwined. So I call this a prescriptive epic, and this is something I've used in my book, and this is something also that we're using in our marketing. That's why I'm calling this process PLC 0, because, for instance, for my next launch, we're doing a documentary that serves as the first piece of pre-launch content. And the documentary is built like this entire process I'm telling you is built. We introduce characters and we weave a story there. And because of that, the message goes through, every person can relate to part of the story and get the point. So here are 6 keys to writing a prescriptive epic. Key number 1, you need to have a prologue. And the prologue is what you have at the very beginning that sets the tone for the whole book or the whole launch series. And then there will be several acts with a lot of things happening, but you need basically at the beginning and the end of the story to start with the shock value to catch people's attention and to end by tying up all the stories that you've started and told to the movie. Because there is a huge difference between the deep stories that people need to create the transformation and the shock value stories that people need to be hooked. When I started my presentation today, I told you about having a handgun, a loaded one, pointed at me, and here's how this happened. After the 2017 LaunchCon event, we went out with a few of the attendees to a shooting range. And with me in my lane was a young lady, young Israeli woman, who had never held a handgun in her life. And when you go to a shooting range, sometimes they spend a lot of time teaching you what to do, but not a lot of time teaching you what not to do. So you might spend 15 minutes being told, okay, this is how you hold it, this is how you aim, this is how you shoot, blah, 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 this is how you reload the gun. But they don't think, let's also make sure we tell people, after you've hit the target, don't celebrate. especially if there's more than one bullet in the gun. So luckily, there were 3 of us in the lane, and luckily I have done target practice before, so I'm right behind her to make sure that it stays safe. Oh my God, you're here! Oh, you know who I'm talking about then. Okay. So, you know, it's never a scary moment to have your would-be assassin be present when you're speaking on stage. So I have to make sure I get all the facts straight. So as she turns to celebrate with the gun in her hand, there's this other person who's back, which is a dangerous situation. But luckily, I'm right behind her, because initially I was there just in case of the recoil, because she is not a very heavy woman. And I don't know, there are so many YouTube videos on the internet of people like being knocked off their feet. It's like a genre. That I was there and I was able to catch her and turn her back in the right direction. Now, the reason I told this story is that A, for the shock value, and B, to show you 2 things that I learned from it. The first one is that's what sparked a realization for me. I realized sometimes we spend so much time teaching people what to do that we forget to show the example of what not to do. What holds people back, what are the typical mistakes. And if we just take just a moment to show what not to do, sometimes we actually provide more value than the whole manual. The second thing is, I use this as a shock value story, but now that you know how it came to happen and what resulted, it's not a huge arc, right? You can make a whole book from that story. It's a good gambit to open, catch people's attention, make a point, and then move on. You don't want all of the stories to be like that. You need to have some stories that maybe start slower, but then they build through your book. Did I get all the facts straight? Okay, awesome. I was going to make a joke about the Israeli army training people without giving them guns, but I think, I'm not going to go there. Not going there. So, the second piece to make your prescriptive epic is the characters. This is still about providing value and advice to people. So you want your characters to be actual case studies of people they can connect with. So at the beginning of the book, I would introduce all of the characters. In my book, there are 9 stories, mine and 8 entrepreneurs that I personally know and interviewed. And I introduce all of them, their normal world that they used to live in. And guess who lives in a very similar world than all of these characters? My avatar, the reader. So there's at least one person they can connect with. There's a young mother that had to survive a burnout crisis, a breast cancer crisis, and then leave her country to start her business. There's a guy that started his life coaching business at the ripe age of 16. There is an entrepreneur that said, I'm going to start a web business at the age of 60. So there are very diverse people. They each have their set of challenges. So my reader will find his challenges or her challenges within each of those stories. And then for each of them, there is an inciting incident, which is what prompted them to go on the quest to change. Which brings me to the third part, raise the stakes. Over the course of the book, we follow along with the stories, and the stakes get raised. The challenges get bigger. And what's interesting when you weave the stories like that is that you can show people having different reactions to similar problems. And you can show what the consequences of each choice is. So part of the training in the book is I give the tools, but what I learned from Malcolm Gladwell is you don't just give the tools. You first show someone that struggled, so that the question is raised of how would they solve that problem, and then you give the reader the tool. So now the reader hopes that the character is going to use it to solve the problem, and he does, or she does, or doesn't. Fourth piece is the all is lost moment. Whenever you have a cast of characters, you need someone to die at the climax of the book. So let's say, for instance, you do a seminar like LaunchCon, many speakers, you've done it for the 4th year. Of course, there's gonna be some weak link, like Erico. So you make sure he's not there on the 4th one. So within my book, what I thought was, okay, I'm writing a book about different people that are starting their business. I want to tell the story of a person who didn't make it. One of the 8 doesn't make it. And I tell the reader at the very beginning of the book. I just don't say who that is. So now, as they are learning about the stories, they're constantly trying to guess, okay, is this a good choice or not a good choice? Would I have done the same or not? And I only reveal who doesn't make it at the last moment. But see how important it is to show how decisions have consequences? Different decisions in different situations? Because then people can say, okay, in this situation, I shouldn't do the same as Yvan. The 5th part is closure. By the end of the book, every other character has completed their arc, they've grown and succeeded in different ways. So the brash risk-takers have learned to be a little bit more cautious. The timid ones have learned to be a little bit more outspoken. The people who didn't know how to say no have learned how to do it. And you make sure that the conclusion is clear on the success. So you make sure that the case studies, people get what they actually needed at the beginning, even though it might not be what they wanted at the beginning, but they've grown, so you have to make sure they are real. Which means I actually went back to people whose story I knew because I was the person that consulted on their launch and did all of that, but just checked that if we do a little interview, can you answer a few questions? Just check that I had my facts right, that it made sense, but was also accurate. Because if you're taking your reader on a journey or someone through your launch on a journey, you don't want someone to read your next book and be like, wait, this is the same person, but it happened something completely different from your previous book. And this is something that I learned from one of my friends. He said, truth trumps memory. If you don't lie, you don't have to remember what you said. Makes your life way easier. And I'd like to share just a few lessons I learned through tracking the whole process of writing my book. So the book has just been published, but I had a very specific tracking system to know to the second how much time I was spending there, because as Jeff said, I only work on my business 1 day a week, which is Thursdays. So I wanted to make sure that when I'm doing another project, like a creative project, this book, my upcoming children's book, I'm just tracking what's happening. I don't want to be working on my business just 1 day and then still be on a computer 24/7 the rest of the time with the excuse that this is not technically my business. So I tracked it, and I tracked all the words I written. This is the curve of the book writing. You can see how a deadline makes you more effective. This is over the course of 2 years. And at the beginning, I was convinced that 1,000 words a day was like a really good day. And in the last month, like 4,000 words a day was a really bad day. But on average, when I made the math, I was writing 10 to 11 words per minute of writing. This is on the days where I felt like God was using me as a vessel to type on my MacBook Pro. But how many of you have some days where God is not using your MacBook Pro? I had a few days where I was like, okay, this is a day where I would rather stay in my sofa, watching Netflix, eating ice cream, but the only reason I couldn't do that was we were traveling, there was no sofa, I didn't have a Netflix subscription, and I hate ice cream. So I would still sit in front of the computer. But there are days where you just don't feel like it. How many of you have felt like this before? I also tracked my productivity on those days. And on those days, I wrote 9 to 10 words per minute. And I only knew it when I made the math at the end. I realized, wow, it's just about putting in the hours and being patient with myself. Of course, on those days, I would only write for 1 or 2 Pomodoros. So like, I write in 50-minute segments. I could maybe just do 2 and I was empty. And on the really good days, I could do more. But when I was working, the speed actually didn't change that much. If I just put in the hours, I felt it's just a matter of when I'm finishing the book, but it will be finished. Another stat that's interesting. This is my top speed. 22 words per minute when I did not have internet access for research. This is my writing speed whenever internet access was enabled on my computer. Interesting, isn't it? Even though research was supposed to make me more productive. So maybe when you're writing your next launch script, preparing your webinar, you want to do all the stuff you can do without Googling the image on Google Image to put it there. Just like put in TK to complete on the slide and say, I'll come back to it later. Now I'd like to leave you with just a short segment from the actual book. And this is my rough translation of the very last chapter. 10 years ago, I learned at one of Jeff's events, actually, from one of the guest speakers. He was quoting Simon Sinek's Start with Why. How many of you have heard of this book and presentation? I learned recently how important it is to also end with why. Because you're leaving people with the reason they started through the journey in the first place. So this is a short excerpt from the last segment of my book, and it's called The Free Entrepreneur Manifesto. We are a group of insane, creative, enthusiastic people who are crazy enough to want freedom. We have what others would call a superpower, the ability to imagine a life that's different from the status quo, and the courage to make hard choices to achieve that vision. We are a little scary. Those who see us pursuing our dream have a hard time taking us seriously. They often start by criticizing us, making fun of us, trying to discourage us, but secretly they envy us. It does not matter. One day, when our dream comes true, they will not fail to come and ask us for advice. How many of you have heard me talk about evergreen before? How many of you have done an evergreen sequence before? Okay, this is for you. For you to say, when you see us on vacation today with our children, lazily lying on a sunny beach while our business runs on autopilot, you never see those 3, 5, 10 years where we worked without a reward. But no matter what you think, we know we deserve every penny earned, and that's all that matters. It is okay to wave the loaded gun and be a little bit too excited at times. All you need is to make sure the people around you keep you pointed in the right direction. So I just want to leave you with this. Whether you choose to write a book, create a launch sequence, if you use the power of stories to create a transformation, provide value, then you can effect change in the world. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Tali! This is a gift for me. Thank you. So, the young woman I was talking about earlier just gave me a gift. So,
Hopefully it's not a loaded gun.
yeah, we'll see.
Give it up for Sebastian.